Okay. Okay, hi everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Sara Mehryar. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in Grantham Research Institute, London School of Economics. And what I'm going to present today is a part of our project called AI-Assisted Resilience Governance Systems, or GOS, which is funded by UKRI Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub. And it's a collaboration between London School of Economics and University of Southampton, who are our experts in AI. So the motivation of this work is the fact that, well, climate change is obviously not only increasing the probability and severity of disasters, but it's also creating compounding risk of extreme events. This might be due to the completely different events that are overlapped, like for example, what we've recently experienced, pandemic and flood events happening at the same time, or due to the events causing or exacerbating following events, like heat waves that may cause wildfires. And that there has been a lot of attention recently to the concept of governance of compound risk, how actually we can govern compound risks and events. For example, like the most recent one is the UK's third climate change risk assessment report that recommends updating the current model of conventional risk governance in the UK to include cascading climate risks. And there's been also a policy report recently published in the UK that provides some recommendation on governing complex emergencies, which is the case when there are more than one emergency declaration at the local or national level. But when we look what we actually see in all these reports and studies which are supporting governance of compound risk is a large focus on A, coordination across the scales, agencies and sectors, B, continuity of basic services and resilience of critical infrastructure, and C, allocation of resources in a timely and efficient manner, including identifying the most vulnerable population and areas. While these are all very important in compound risk management, but they are all actually only focusing on immediate response to emergencies. But we know that resilience and sustainable governance is a lot more about long-term ex-ante anticipatory and proactive planning for potential risks in future. So if you look at these different stages of disasters management, actually resilience governance is more about risk reduction and preparedness, which comes a lot earlier than actual events, rather than response and recovery that should come after the events. So the resilience governance framework that we are using here includes three parts of risk and resilience assessment, policy option analysis, and implementation, which hopefully encourage more proactive and long-term planning for risk reduction and preparedness. So in the assessment part, we have all methods and tools that are developed for mapping and modeling risks. What we've heard a lot about this part over the last 2-3 days in this workshop, and we know it's related to hazard modeling, exposure mapping, resilience assessment, and vulnerability assessment. And then we have policy option analysis, which has been traditionally supported more with methods for co-benefit analysis and feasibility analysis. But nowadays, recently we are seeing more and more methods that support participatory analysis, citizen engagement, human perception, preferences, and values in the process of policy option analysis, scenario building, as well as methods for quantifying benefits and co-benefits of resilience actions. And then we have implementation part, which is more about designing and implementing incentive mechanisms, regulations and legislations, and behavioral change mechanisms. In this study, we are more focused on particularly the role of AI methods and tools that have been used to support climate resilience governance. So we are interested to see how much AI method can actually support and how much it has been supporting resilience governance assessment, in resilience governance climate resilience governance in terms of assessment, policy option analysis, and implementation. So to begin this project, we conducted a systematic literature review. So we collected the studies that have been focused on applying a kind of AI methods for climate resilience governance, and the domains that we found AI methods and application of AI methods in. The top domains were the first one, disaster management, which is about all the tools, models, methods that have been applied for disaster management in general, or like any kind of disaster, and those that are specifically focused on flood and drought management. And then the third one is agriculture and food production, transportation and critical infrastructure, and water governance and quality. But what these AI methods have been used for, the objective of the application of AI methods, the top one is for climate and disasters modeling and assessment. So that was, and that's significantly higher. The number of the time that AI methods have been used for modeling and assessment is significantly higher than the other objectives or other kind of studies, and which is followed by studies that are about assessing impact of climate change on crops. And the third one is climate change adaptation planning, which is focused on different types of methods and tools that are used for comparing impact of different adaptation strategies. And then we have methods that are supporting response and recovery planning. And interestingly, one of the areas that came a lot in our studies is applying AI methods for social media analysis, to analyzing the output of Twitter, for example, for raising awareness, information sharing, and all, even for damage assessment. But we also looked at how much these the AI methods are supporting assessment, policy analysis, and implementation. We found quite large number of studies that are focused on assessment, which is followed by policy analysis and implementation. But there is a big difference between the number of studies on assessment and those that are on policy option analysis. And methods used, not surprisingly, there's been a lot of studies using machine learning, deep learning, artificial neural network, and agent-based simulation has been used the most for the policy option analysis part, but still there is a big difference between applying agent-based model and machine learning. So we have a lot of studies on like with descriptive outcome on what is the current risk, what might be the future risk, but probably less on what should be done and how we can actually support policymakers. And then we also looked at the compound risk, although we didn't find studies that are specific, mentioning compounding or cascading risks, but we found quite a few that are focused on multi-hazard analysis. And interestingly, in most of these studies, multi-hazard models or multi-hazard like methods that are used for multi-hazard analysis just consider different kind of hazards, and they can be applied for different types of hazards. But the fact about interacting and interconnected risks have been overlooked in most of these studies. And another observation was that there's a lot of, when we talk about risk assessment, there's a lot of studies on assessing probability and severity of multi-hazards and exposure, but there's much less on how we can actually measure social vulnerability and social resilience to multi-hazards and compound risk. That's still part that is not quite clear. And then we also observed the lack of studies, as I said, on policy option appraisal and implementation, particularly about the compound risks. And this is actually, a particularly important area, because when we talk about compound risk and multi-hazard, that's where that we also see lots of very different and even conflicting preferences, perceptions, and values, different benefits and co-benefits of interventions for different types of risks and hazard, trade-offs, and also implementation and incentive mechanisms that can be different for different kind of risks. That's why I think we think that it's quite important to focus on policy option appraisal, considering compound risk and all these methods that have been developed so far to support policy option analysis that should be also used for compound risk. So this is a work in progress. We are also going to conduct a survey, an expert survey, to understand how AI methods can support policy option appraisal and action implementation in the face of compound risk, and how actually these AI methods can be used, can be more applicable and useful for the policymakers. And the outcome of this will be a roadmap for further studies and improvements required to increase applicability and usefulness of AI methods to support climate resilience governance, particularly in the face of compound risk. I'm very much happy to hear your thoughts and comments on this either now or later. Thank you very much.